BP and ExxonMobil do not publish what their price projections are. So I'm assuming, for the purpose of this graph, I'm assuming that DOE's price projections, I'm going to use those also for BP and for ExxonMobil, but they don't publish their own. So we have projections from BP, from ExxonMobil, from the OPEC outlook, from the IEA, and they have three scenarios. I'm going to use their one called current policies, what they used to call their reference case projections, and the DOE reference case. Generally, the projections are pretty similar with two main differences. OPEC has much lower price projections than the others. OPEC has price projections of, I calculated roughly in real terms, $70, $71 by 2030. The other ones, IEA and DOE, have price projections in the range of $120, $130. The big difference is, the second big difference in these projections are that DOE is much more optimistic about non-OPEC supply than IEA is. Okay? DOE is forecasting 60 million barrels a day of non-OPEC supply. IEA is projecting only about 50. Okay? So as a consequence, IEA is projecting higher call on OPEC, and DOE is talking about 33 million barrels a day of OPEC exports, and IEA is talking 41 million barrels a day of OPEC exports. These are three price projections of DOE. I'm a little constrained for time, so let me skip over them. They do a high price case, a low price case. Their high price case gets up to $204 a barrel in 2030. Let me not go into the details on those. I'm going to skip over the IEA policy scenario projections. Let me talk a little bit about why I think the projections of demand and therefore of price are too low. These are DOE's projections of Middle East consumption. Let's say, this is, the heavy line is what their actual consumption is in the Middle East. These are the projections. So in the year 2000, IEA projected that by 2010, the Middle East would be consuming about 5.5 million barrels a day. 2002, this is what their projection for that year was. 2003, and so forth. In fact, we know that it was more like 7.3. So they dramatically underprojected consumption in the Middle East countries. Okay, this is a problem. They don't have projections for OPEC, but they do have projections for Middle East, which is about as close as we can get to their projections for OPEC. So consistently underprojecting how much these countries are going to be consuming of their own oil. The implications of that are that if OPEC is going to be consuming much more of its own oil, then they're not going to have nearly as much to export. Okay? This is a graph that shows OPEC oil consumption on the vertical, and I'm using a logarithmic scale. I want to focus on percentage changes. And here I'm projecting OPEC real income on the horizontal scale, also using logarithmic scale. These diagonal lines are important. If you're moving parallel to a diagonal line, your oil consumption is increasing as rapidly as your income. And that's basically what happened from '86 through 2008. Their oil consumption increased about as rapidly as their income. If we make that projection continue, it's going to get their consumption would be as high as 18 million barrels a day in 2030 if we use DOE growth rates for their income. Okay? So this is a kind of my own simple back-of-the-envelope projection if their oil consumption grows as rapidly as their income. That's an extraordinary amount of their own consumption if it happens. Their projection, DOE's projection, is that it's going to grow from about 8 million barrels a day up to about 11 million barrels a day. Although it's grown almost as rapidly as income for the last 20 years, they're projecting that it's going to slow down. It's not going to grow nearly as rapidly in the future as it has in the past. So that's OPEC projection. This is a final graph about why I think that projections of consumption are too low from DOE and IEA and ExxonMobil and so forth. If we do per capita consumption, it turns out that world per capita consumption has been about 2 liters a day for the last 40 years. 2 liters a day on average around the world for the last 40 years. DOE is projecting that that's going to stay flat, maybe decline a little bit. They're projecting slight decline in OECD per capita, slight increase in former Soviet Union, and rest of the world, although it's increased 2.5% historically for the last 40 years, they're saying for some reason that it's going to slow down dramatically. And so although it had been growing like this, they're saying that it's going to grow like that in the future. Dramatic slowdown in world oil projections from DOE and the others. Did a paper with Joyce Dargay, published, listed here. If we assume that growth in the future for the rest of the world is going to be similar to what has been in the past, if it grows 2.5% annually, they're going to get from about 1 liter a day up to about 2 liters a day. DOE says they're going to go from 1 liter a day to about 1.2 liters a day. But if they grow as rapidly in the future, 2.5% as they did in the past, the numbers are staggering. The numbers are, it's going to be 134 million barrels a day, okay, in world oil consumption if we use DOE price assumptions and DOE income growth assumptions. Now, I don't believe that the world is going to be producing 134 million barrels a day. I'm not projecting production at that level. I'm just saying that if we calculate what the implied demand is going to be using DOE's price and income assumptions, it's a much bigger number, okay? So the other way of looking at that is that price is going to have to go a lot higher than DOE is assuming if we're going to constrain the growth of world oil consumption to the lower expected growth of non-OPEC supply. Let me go back 10 years. 2001, we have numerous people making projections. I'll show you what they were. I'm going to skip over the internet thing. It'll take a minute. I hope you can read these. This is from the International Energy Outlook that DOE published in 2001. These are all the projections of prices in constant real dollars, 1999 dollars, from DOE, Standard & Poor's, IEA, PIRA, WIFA, GRI, Deutsche Bank, and so forth. All of them projected by 2020 prices in the range of $20, $25, okay? What jumped out at me were these numbers. The ones that made projections of OPEC output in 2020, DOE, S&P, IEA, Deutsche Bank, projected that by 2020, OPEC would be producing 60 million barrels a day. 60 million barrels a day. They have never really produced more than 30 million barrels a day, but the projection as of 2001 was that they're going to be producing 60 million barrels a day. So, this is what the projections are that we have, I'm sorry, essentially flat prices, continuing growth in world oil consumption, modest growth in non-OPEC supply, and OPEC is going to increase its production from 30 million barrels a day to 60 million barrels a day. If you look at it in these graphs, they're all moving rapidly to the right here. Big increases in big increases in OPEC exports. I changed the axis. It used to go to 30. Now it goes to 65. Okay, so this horizontal axis is different from what I'd showed you before because everyone, 2001, we're projecting OPEC is going to have big increases in their exports. And they're going to do it at low prices. Now, when I look at this graph, what I see is that basically OPEC is going to get, it's going to be producing a great deal more exports, but they're not going to be getting more revenue because they're going to be lowering their price. So they're on this ISO revenue curve, and basically they're going to slide down it. Okay, so that's the projections that I'm looking at as of 2001. So what was my reaction to this? I wasn't so bothered by the constant real oil prices, that kind of extrapolation of what had happened for the last 20 years. But I was concerned about this projected doubling to 60 million barrels a day of OPEC production. So the closest I could come, and I'm not going to show the video, I have a clip from YouTube of John McEnroe in his immortal words, you cannot be serious. You cannot be serious. He said it more eloquently than I did it. He said it at Wimbledon. He said it on center court. That's the YouTube clip. It's 18 seconds. It would take me a while to do it. I wrote an article in 2001, basically, and this is the, most of my article titles are fairly bland. This is the most aggressive title I've ever written, I think, in my life. How plausible are the consensus projections? And I went through the calculations using DOE's numbers, and basically it did not make sense for OPEC to double its output. It did not make sense for Saudi Arabia, even if it could get nobody else in OPEC to agree with it, okay? For Saudi Arabia by itself to increase its output. They had negative incentive to increase their output as rapidly as projected. And OPEC would be much better off if they did not double their output, if they let their output increase perhaps slowly. And I've done the calculations, and the details are published in a series of articles in the Energy Journal, 2001, 2004, 2007. Let me skip over this. This is about DOE's projections. I'm running a little bit short on time. Let me give you my sense of the future, or how I would think that we ought to analyze what would be in OPEC's own best interest to do over the next 20 years. And so what I'm going to be looking for is what I call a robustly optimal strategy for OPEC. Strategy to how to set price or set their output levels or their market share in a way that is robustly optimal. It'll serve them as well as possible, and the robust part means that we don't really know about what the true income growth rate for the future would be, or what kinds of unexpected events like shutdowns of nuclear power plants, what that might do to oil consumption in terms of growth of demand, growth of non-OPEC supply. We're not really sure about the true price elasticity of demand and supply. And so what I'm looking for is a strategy that's going to do relatively well over a wide range of assumptions about these parameter values that we don't really know the true values of. So some of these differences I've talked about, big differences between IEA and DOE with respect to non-OPEC production, differences in projections of demand between the paper that I did with Joyce Dargay and DOE projections. There's a lot of differences, and I'm going to examine lots of different cases and compare what I can say, see what I can say about what strategies would do well for OPEC. I did 500 cases, lots of different assumptions. I did calculations as to what would be the payoff for OPEC and what would be the payoff for OPEC's core, where we're going to assume that the core of OPEC consists of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the Emirates.